Sir, I'm calling the police right now. I don't know what you think you're doing, but you don't belong here. That was the first thing Karen ever said to me. Not a hello, not a can I help you? Just a frantic accusation screamed across a suburban driveway while I held a screwdriver and a new deadbolt. She didn't know I was the new owner of the entire duplex she lived in. Didn't know I'd closed on it 2 days ago. Didn't know I was replacing the locks to start light renovations before renting out the other side. No, all she saw was a black man in a hoodie, touching a door in her neighborhood. The kicker? She didn't just call the cops. She stood behind her mailbox, camera in hand, narrating like she was filming a wildlife documentary. This male individual appears to be attempting a break-in. I think he's on something. Her hands shook as she live-streamed. Mine didn't. Because I knew what she didn't. She was reporting her new landlord. It had been a quiet Saturday morning until she opened her mouth. Birds chirped, sun out, new beginnings and all that. I was kneeling by the door of Unit A, the vacant half of the duplex, enjoying the satisfying click of metal on metal. I was so into it I didn't even hear her approach until I felt the heat of her glare. I looked up, and there she was, like she'd spawned out of thin air, tight yoga pants, oversized sunglasses, arms folded with the fury of 100 HOA meetings behind them. Her voice hit me before I could say a word. I'm going to need you to stop whatever you're doing right now. This is private property. I blinked. Yes, my property. She scoffed like I told her the earth was flat. Don't get smart. I've lived here for 12 years, I know everyone on this block. The Johnsons own this unit. Used to, I said, standing up and wiping my hands on my jeans. I bought it on Wednesday. Jamal Thomas. I extended my hand. She looked at it like I'd offered her a snake. She didn't shake it. Instead, she pulled out her phone. We'll see what the police have to say about this. And like that, she was already mid-911 call. I could hear her through the speaker. Yes, I'm on Oak Ridge Lane, and there's a suspicious person breaking into a unit. He's claiming to own it, but I know the owners. He's threatening me. I blinked again. Ma'am, I literally haven't moved since I stood up. She moved farther away, still narrating. He's getting aggressive now. And that's when I laughed. Not out of humor, but from disbelief. I wasn't even mad yet. That came later. The cops arrived 7 minutes later. Faster than usual, thanks to Karen's panic tone. 2 squad cars. Lights, sirens, everything short of a SWAT team. I stayed where I was, arms crossed, lease papers and ID in hand. The first officer approached cautiously until he saw the document. You Jamal Thomas? I nodded. He glanced at the deed, my license, the email from the realtor. He looked up and smiled slightly. You were on Channel 8 last month, right? You did that urban renewal project near downtown. That's me. Karen, meanwhile, was still yelling. Are you really going to just take his word for it? He probably forged that paperwork. The officer sighed. Ma'am, everything checks out. He owns this place. You could hear a balloon deflate somewhere in her soul. She tried to save face. Well, I was just being cautious. You can't be too careful these days. I gave her a look sharp enough to shave granite. You're absolutely right. I wouldn't want just anyone near my property. I put deliberate emphasis on the last word. She stood there frozen, mouth slightly open, trying to reset her mental software. Then it hit her. Wait, you said your property. Do you mean both sides? I nodded. Units A and B, whole duplex. Got it at a steal, really. I pulled the keys from my pocket and tossed them in the air, catching them with a grin. And I believe you live in Unit B. So technically, Karen, I'm your new landlord. Silence. You could hear her ego shatter into 1,000 tiny pieces. She looked at me like the sky had fallen. Her face, flushed red with either rage or embarrassment, maybe both, twitched as if trying to form words, but none came. She eventually turned on her heel and stormed back toward her unit without another word. The police left, shaking their heads. I returned to my lock changing, now humming a little tune. But I knew this wasn't over. No one like Karen just walks away after being proven wrong. I could feel it in the air. This was the beginning of something ridiculous. Sure enough, 20 minutes later, I found a handwritten note shoved under my windshield wiper. It read, "You may own the place, but that doesn't mean you're welcome here. People like you ruin neighborhoods." I read it twice, then chuckled, because of course she didn't sign it. But I already knew it was her. She had Karen handwriting, angry cursive, like each letter was fighting the one before it. I filed it away, snapped a picture for documentation, and drove off to Home Depot to grab a few more supplies. The thought occurred to me that I might need cameras installed sooner than planned. That night, as I lay in bed in my modest townhouse across town, I played the day's events over in my head. Her voice, shrill and insistent. Her face when she realized I was her landlord. The way she crumbled when the police didn't take her side. It wasn't just racism. It was control. Entitlement. The kind that doesn't die easy. And while I didn't start this war, I had a sneaking suspicion Karen was going to escalate it. Because entitled people don't handle being humbled. They don't retreat, they reload. And something told me Karen had a whole arsenal of petty waiting in the wings. But what she didn't know, I'd dealt with worse. I'd come up through real estate shark tanks and city politics. I once evicted a guy who tried to fake his own death. I could handle Karen. In fact, I kind of looked forward to it. Because this wasn't just about property anymore. This was about putting someone like her in a place she clearly hadn't visited in years. Reality. The morning after the lock-changing incident, I arrived at the property expecting silence. Maybe even a thin veil of civility. Instead, I pulled into the driveway to find a note duct-taped to the front door of Unit A. It was written in thick red marker, as if someone was drafting a ransom demand. This neighborhood has standards. No soliciting. No unregistered business activity. We will report you. I took a photo and peeled it off, amused that "we" was clearly just Karen. The ink smelled fresh. She probably woke up at dawn, brewed a pot of anger, and got straight to work on her next passive-aggressive campaign. I hadn't even moved in yet. Just the idea of me owning the building had her spiraling like a raccoon in a dryer. I walked to the backyard to assess the lawn, which needed some care, and there she was, on her porch, pretending to read a book but watching me like I was a criminal casing the joint. Her eyes peeked just over the top of the cover, some thick romance novel she clearly wasn't reading. I gave her a polite nod. She didn't return it. Instead, she pulled out her phone and began recording again, under the absurd pretense of being subtle. I heard her mutter, still loitering, "This is being documented." I waved. She snapped her phone down like a guilty teenager. Petty wasn't just a personality trait with her, it was a way of life. By the time the weekend rolled around, Karen had turned my quiet renovation project into a full-blown sitcom. On Saturday, she called the HOA to report me for unauthorized structural modifications. I had changed a door handle and replaced a cracked light fixture. Apparently, in her twisted world, that amounted to a full demolition job. That same afternoon, I caught her sneaking into my recycling bin. She was digging through my trash like a raccoon in Ugg boot. I stepped out with a soda and said, "Looking for something, Karen?" She jumped and shouted, "You're violating disposal regulations. These are plastic cap. They go in a separate container." She held one up like it was a smoking gun. I took a sip of my drink and said, "You're welcome to sort it if you care that much." She didn't respond. Just stormed back to her unit like I'd insulted her ancestors. The following Monday, she upped the ante. I received a formal letter in my mailbox from the HOA. The envelope looked like it was licked closed by pure malice. Inside was a fine notice, $200 for improper parking and exterior clutter. The parking offense? My contractor's van had been partially parked on the grass, one wheel. The clutter? A single ladder propped against the wall for less than 10 minutes while he was cleaning the gutters. I couldn't stop laughing. It was like watching someone try to weaponize breathing. I made a quick call to the HOA office, ready to clear things up, only to learn that Karen had called in 5 separate complaints under various aliases. K. Smith, K. Renshaw, concerned resident number 4. Subtlety was not her gift. I knew I couldn't just play defense. That's how people like Karen win. They wear you down with nonsense until you finally move or give in just to get peace. But I've never been good at surrender. So I called a lawyer buddy who specialized in landlord-tenant law and HOA litigation. He laughed for a solid minute after I explained the situation, then said, "Document everything. And I mean everything. She's already stepping in it. You just need to be ready when she finally slips." That's all I needed to hear. That night, I installed high-definition security cameras around the property, visible enough to be a deterrent but subtle enough to make her paranoid. The next morning, she stood on her porch and stared at them like they were turrets pointed at her soul. To add a little fuel to the fire, I left her a welcome gift. I knocked gently on her door and left a basket of muffins, along with a handwritten note, looking forward to a peaceful tenant-landlord relationship. If you need anything, just reach out, preferably through official communication channels. Warm regards, Jamal. The basket was still on her porch 4 hours later, untouched. By dusk, it was gone. I like to think she ate the muffins while furiously Googling how to file harassment claims that wouldn't immediately be laughed out of court. But Karen wasn't done. Not even close. On Thursday, I received a notice from the HOA, again, that I was in violation of exterior design uniformity. Apparently, my welcome mat was not on the approved list. My welcome mat. It said, "Come back with tacos." I replaced it with one that said, "Karen lives next door, wave with caution." Within 2 hours, I got another notice. Inappropriate decorative signage. I kept the mat. Then came the piece de resistance. Friday morning, my contractor showed up and told me that someone had blocked the side gate with 2 full garbage cans. They were wedged in tight, clearly meant to prevent access to the backyard. We moved them aside, and I reviewed the camera footage. There she was at 6:13 a.m., in pajamas and slippers, dragging the bins like she was moving ancient relics to a secret vault. She paused halfway through to glare at the camera, then carried on like she was in a spy movie. I saved the footage, labeled it karentrash.mov, and emailed it to myself for safekeeping. That evening, I received yet another HOA notice, this time for suspicious activity involving tenants. That was rich. Karen was now accusing me of being suspicious on my own property. I called the HOA hotline and asked who had submitted the complaint. The woman on the line hesitated before whispering, "We're not technically allowed to say, but it's the same person as last time." Again. I asked her how many complaints Karen had filed this week. She paused, then said, "Counting today? 9. I could hear the exhaustion in her voice. "You're not the first person she's targeted," she added, almost as a comfort. "You might be the first who fights back." But here's the thing Karen didn't know. While she was busy weaponizing lawn decor and garbage placement, I was playing the long game. What she hadn't realized, in her rush to report every imaginary infraction, was that the HOA board had recently opened up voting shares for sale. A handful of longtime owners were tired of Karen's antics and happy to cash out. I quietly bought just enough to hold influence, enough to show up at the next board meeting and watch Karen's face when she saw me walk in, not as her tenant, but as her newly minted boss. And just like that, the war she thought she was waging alone became something much bigger. Karen thought this was her turf. But she hadn't realized the game had already changed, and she was playing against someone who knew every rule in the book. The HOA meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening at 6 p.m. I arrived at 5:55, coffee in hand, wearing a crisp button-up and my favorite smirk. The conference room was a beige box with flickering fluorescent lights and a long table that had seen more passive aggression than most marriages. Around it sat 6 board members, 3 of whom I'd already met privately during my strategic buy-in of their voting shares. A few nodded as I walked in. The rest were confused but polite. Karen was nowhere in sight yet, but I knew she'd show up. She always did. People like Karen never missed a chance to assert power, especially when they felt it slipping. At exactly 6:02, she walked in with her usual flair, oversized sunglasses indoors, even though it was cloudy, and a reusable water bottle clutched like a legal document. Her head was held high, but there was tension in her jaw. She spotted me immediately, did a visible double-take, then blinked as if trying to make sense of what she was seeing. Her mouth opened slightly, like she was about to say something, but no sound came out. I calmly sipped my coffee and offered a gentle nod. She ignored it and quickly took a seat, glancing at the agenda like she was reading classified intelligence. The board president, a retired man named Steve with the patience of a saint and the hearing of a rock, began the meeting with the usual formalities. Minutes from the last meeting, budget approvals, blah blah. Karen kept glancing over at me like I was a hallucination she couldn't quite shake. When the topic of excessive complaint filings came up on the agenda, I saw her shift in her chair. The room got a little quieter. Steve cleared his throat and said, "Before we address that, we'd like to welcome our newest board member." He turned to me. "Jamal Thomas, who has recently acquired shares from Mr. and Mrs. Rodriguez." A few heads turned. Karen's head nearly snapped off. She let out an audible gasp. "I'm sorry, what?" she barked. He's on the board?" Her voice cracked halfway through the sentence. Steve looked mildly annoyed. "That's correct. Mr. Thomas now owns 15% of the voting shares and is fully entitled to board participation." Karen looked at me like I'd just burned down her herb garden. I smiled. "Happy to serve. I'm really passionate about building strong, functional communities." Karen didn't speak again for almost 10 minutes, but you could see her trying to hold herself together with every ounce of brittle pride she had. When the discussion moved to her excessive reporting, things truly unraveled. Steve pulled out a stack of printed complaint forms. "Karen, in the past 2 weeks, you've submitted 14 formal complaints, 10 of which were against a single resident, Mr. Thomas." Karen raised a finger. "He's not just a resident, he's a landlord, and he's been disrupting the peace." Steve didn't even flinch. One of the complaints was about a welcome mat. Another was about a lawn hose being slightly curled. One was filed after a security camera was installed on his own property. These are not violations, and it's taking up board resources. She opened her mouth to argue, but I cut in, calmly. "Just to clarify, the hose was curled because I was watering the lawn. Which is, surprisingly, not a crime." That got a laugh from someone at the end of the table. Karen turned red. "This is inappropriate. He's clearly biased and antagonistic." I leaned back in my chair. "I've actually kept detailed records. Every letter, every trash bin relocation, every fake name you used to file complaints. I've even got video. But I'd prefer not to escalate. I think we're all just here to improve the community, right?" My tone was casual, but the message landed with precision. I wasn't here to be bullied, and I wasn't here to play nice either. Karen did what she always did when backed into a corner. She doubled down. She stood up and launched into a dramatic monologue about how the neighborhood was losing its character, how certain types of behavior were taking over, and how standards were being ignored. She never said anything explicitly racist, but she didn't need to. The euphemisms did all the heavy lifting. The room grew colder as she went on. One woman near the end of the table muttered, "Oh my God," under her breath. Another shook his head. Steve eventually cut her off. "Karen, that's enough. We're here to talk about governance, not gatekeeping." The board voted 6-1 to formally censure her for harassment and frivolous reporting. She was livid. She stood there shaking, refusing to sit back down. Then she stormed out of the meeting, slamming the door so hard it rattled the blinds. The room was quiet for a beat before someone said, "Well, that went better than expected." We moved on to budget adjustments like nothing had happened, but the air was lighter. The Karen fog had lifted. But her next move came fast. The very next morning, I arrived to find a fresh pile of trash on my front step. Not in a bin. Just dumped there, in an awkward, angry heap: coffee grounds, soggy cereal, banana peels. It was clearly meant as a message. What she didn't realize was that the security camera caught her red-handed, robe and all, 6:15 a.m., grunting as she dragged the bag across the yard like she was performing some ancient ritual. I didn't even get mad. I just played the footage on my laptop, emailed it to the HOA board with the subject line, "Trash Fairy Caught in the Act," and ordered a second camera, this one pointed directly at her side porch. 2 days later, I returned the favor. Not with trash, of course. I'm not that petty. I hired a local landscaping crew to trim and manicure every inch of the property I owned, which included the shared lawn she used daily. It looked immaculate. Bright flowers, fresh mulch, a perfectly cut hedge in the shape of a thumbs up. I had them leave a laminated sign in the front yard that read, "Proudly maintained by your friendly neighborhood landlord." She saw it when she came out to check her mail and audibly groaned. Then came the moment she realized she wasn't safe even in her sanctuary of petty, the storage closet under the stairs. The duplex had a shared basement, mostly used for old paint cans and junk, but while inspecting it with my contractor, we stumbled upon a hidden back section behind a fake panel. Inside were boxes labeled HOA Docs 2017 to 2022, several of which were supposed to have been turned in to the board years ago. There were old fee receipts, outdated bylaws, and most importantly, evidence that Karen had been collecting dues and miscellaneous fees in cash from at least 4 tenants over the years, without logging them in the system. It all made sense now. She wasn't just an entitled neighbor, she was a petty tyrant who'd gotten used to operating in the shadows. She used the HOA as her personal tool for control. But with me owning part of the board, her grip was slipping fast. She hadn't just picked the wrong enemy. She picked the worst kind of enemy. A calm, legally savvy landlord with receipts, cameras, and a sense of humor. And I had only just begun. Karen's descent into full-blown chaos didn't come all at once. It was gradual, like a slow-rolling landslide fueled by equal parts pride and denial. After the board meeting debacle and the exposure of her unauthorized HOA fee collection, she didn't retreat. She retaliated. But instead of any clever maneuver or strategic pushback, she resorted to what she knew best: petty warfare wrapped in self-righteousness. She doubled down on filing complaints, this time accusing me of creating an unsafe environment, stalking, and, bizarrely, excessive doorbell usage. I hadn't even rung her bell. Not once. But logic had long since exited the building with Karen's sense of dignity. I received another letter from the HOA. This one was more apologetic than accusatory. It read like a formality, a box they had to check before moving on. It even had a handwritten note at the bottom from Steve that said, "We're working on it. Hang tight." But that same day, I also received something far more significant: a certified letter of non-payment. Karen had failed to pay her rent for the second month in a row, despite the updated lease agreement, despite the reminders, and despite her very vocal insistence that I don't recognize your authority as my landlord. I wasn't surprised. Karen didn't just disagree with the situation, she outright refused to acknowledge it existed. As far as she was concerned, I was a hallucination she was waiting to blink away. I gave her the full 15-day notice to pay or vacate, neatly taped to her front door. The moment she saw it, she marched over and ripped it off, stormed into her unit, and returned moments later with a hand-scrawled counter-notice. I dispute this illegal attempt to remove a lawful tenant. You will be hearing from my attorney. She taped it over the spot where mine had been, right under my security camera. I chuckled and peeled it off before heading back to my car. I knew her game. Delay. Obstruct. Confuse. But what Karen didn't understand was that I'd been in real estate long enough to deal with every breed of obstructionist. She thought she could outlast me. But I had time, legal precedent, and coffee on my side. While the eviction process moved forward, Karen planned her version of the Boston Tea Party. She called it a neighborhood rally for justice, and by that, she meant an awkward backyard party with a sign taped to her fence that read, "Stop the Tyrant Landlord." She sent out invitations via a clunky email chain to everyone on the street, even CCing people who had moved away years ago. I got a copy forwarded to me from one of the neighbors with the subject line, "Karen's lost it." The invite promised food, music, and a community message against exploitation. No one asked who was being exploited, but I already knew this event would flop. The day of the so-called rally arrived. I peeked through the blinds around 2 p.m. to see her yard covered in sad folding chairs, a Bluetooth speaker playing 90s protest music, and a tray of room-temperature hummus. A total of 3 people showed up. One left after 5 minutes. One was her sister, judging by the matching haircut. The third was a confused DoorDash driver who stayed for chips and left with a free t-shirt. At 2:40, a city health inspector arrived, clipboard in hand, responding to a noise complaint and, while there, discovering several violations, including an improperly stored grill, exposed wiring on her porch light, and a broken fence panel she blamed on the recent winds. She was issued a written warning and told to clean it up within the week or face fines. I didn't even have to lift a finger. Karma brought a measuring tape. But even that wasn't the tipping point. The true collapse came when Karen's story hit the local news. A neighbor who had been quietly recording the entire saga, yes, even I didn't know someone else had been watching, sent the footage and timeline to a local reporter known for covering neighborhood madness. The segment aired on a Sunday evening. HOA board member tries to evict her own landlord. They used clips from the police call, the trash footage, even a zoomed-in still of her handwritten complaint. The anchor's expression by the end of the story said it all. Karen became a meme before the next morning. "You can't evict me, I pay the HOA with cash," was trending locally. The fallout was instant. Karen's employer, a mid-sized accounting firm with a reputation to protect, didn't waste time. She showed up Monday morning, tried to play it cool, but by lunch she was called into HR and escorted out by 2 p.m. I watched her trudge into her driveway that afternoon, shoulders hunched, makeup streaked, eyes bloodshot. For a moment I actually felt bad for her. But then I remembered the banana peels on my doorstep, the racial profiling, the forged HOA violations, and the months of stress she had gleefully inflicted because she thought she could get away with it. Sympathy only stretches so far. By the end of the week, the eviction was official. She hadn't paid. She hadn't responded with valid legal defense. And she hadn't prepared to leave. When the sheriff's notice was taped to her door, she tore it down, screamed into the air like it had betrayed her personally, and called someone sobbing, "He's actually kicking me out." She slammed the door hard enough that I could hear it from the other side of the duplex. The moving truck came 2 days later. A couple of tired-looking guys arrived, took one look at the pile of junk she'd failed to pack, and exchanged the kind of glance that said, "We're not getting paid enough for this." Neighbors watched from behind blinds. Some peeked out with snacks like it was a parade. I didn't say anything as she packed. I didn't wave. I didn't gloat. I just stood in the yard, pruning a hydrangea bush while she trudged back and forth with boxes. At one point, she turned to me, eyes burning with hatred, and hissed, "You're ruining this neighborhood." I gently clipped a dead bloom and replied, "No, Karen. I'm saving it." She opened her mouth but couldn't find a comeback. Just stomped toward the truck and slammed the tailgate shut like it owed her money. As her U-Haul pulled away, the most incredible thing happened. The neighborhood lit up. People came out of their homes. Someone popped a bottle of champagne. A father let his kids draw chalk art in the middle of the street. 2 ladies from the corner house brought cookies. They called it Karen's farewell party, and someone even made a playlist. Hit the Road Jack played on repeat. It was like a storm had passed and the sun came back out. For the first time since I'd bought the place, the block actually felt like a community. What Karen didn't know was that I had already lined up new tenants for her old unit, a young couple, polite and quiet, who were thrilled to move into a freshly renovated space with a functional landlord and no HOA lunatic on the loose. The place looked better already, and so did the vibe. The cameras stayed up, the lawn stayed green, and for the first time in months, I slept without checking my email for complaint notices. Karen thought she could bully, stall, and manipulate her way into control. But in the end, all her schemes collapsed under the weight of their own absurdity. The same entitlement she used to dominate others became the reason she lost everything. And me? I didn't just win the war, I got a new lease on peace. Peace arrived like the first cool breeze after a brutal summer. With Karen gone, the duplex felt lighter, like it had finally exhaled after holding its breath for too long. I walked the property without scanning the windows for passive-aggressive glares. No crumpled complaint letters appeared in my mailbox. The lawn stayed garbage-free. There were no bizarre threats written in angry cursive, number 6 a.m. trash bin attacks, no whispered accusations of unauthorized hose positioning. Just sunlight, silence, and the soft sound of a neighborhood learning how to breathe again. The new tenants moved into Unit B a week later. Marcus and Tasha, a young couple in their late 20s, were both teachers and had spent the last year couch surfing after their old apartment building got sold and gutted. They were respectful, easygoing, and thrilled to have a place of their own. On move-in day, they brought over a tray of homemade brownies and asked if there were any local HOA nightmares they should know about. I grinned and said, "The last one just left. You're safe now." Tasha laughed and said, "Well, bless whoever got rid of her." I just nodded and said, "Amen." The block transformed over the next month. People who had avoided neighborhood events started organizing impromptu get-togethers. Lawn chairs came out. Kids played without being scolded for sidewalk chalk violations. One of the older neighbors, Mrs. Ling, started a community garden in her front yard. No one filed a single complaint. It was like the whole area had been under a spell and finally woke up. Several neighbors privately thanked me for surviving the Karen War and joked about putting up a commemorative plaque. Someone even made stickers that said Karen-free zone and handed them out like party favors. It felt ridiculous and perfect at the same time. Then, out of nowhere, a podcast producer reached out. Apparently, the local news story had gone viral far beyond our little neighborhood. Someone had forwarded the clip to a popular online show that specialized in real-life petty drama and neighborhood dispute. The host wanted to interview me, said they loved the footage, and wanted to do an entire episode titled, "How to Evict Your Own Karen." At first, I hesitated. I'm not a spotlight guy. But then I thought about everything I went through, every false accusation, every ridiculous violation notice, every ounce of stress she piled on me just because she couldn't imagine someone like me owning a property like hers. And I thought, no, this is a story worth telling. The podcast was a hit. I told the whole story from start to finish, from the first time she called the cops on me for changing my own locks, all the way to the moving truck and the neighborhood block party. I shared audio clips, snippets of HOA letters, even played the clip of her trash-dumping escapade while the host laughed so hard they had to pause recording. The episode hit 1 million streams in the first week. Suddenly, I had DMs from people all over the country sharing their own Karen horror stories. One guy told me his neighbor had tried to sue him for putting wind chimes on his porch. Another had been fined by his HOA for planting the wrong species of tulip. Misery really does love company. A few weeks after the podcast aired, I was sitting on my porch, sipping iced tea and enjoying the calm, when a man walked up the driveway. Tall, maybe early 50s, graying hair, slight limp. He looked vaguely familiar but out of context. He stopped halfway up and said, "You Jamal?" I nodded. He stuck out his hand and said, "Name's Dave. I'm Karen's ex-husband." I blinked. Seriously? He laughed. Yup. I saw the podcast. Recognized the voice before the name. Had to come shake your hand. You did what I couldn't. You survived her and came out on top. I didn't know what to say, so I just offered him a chair and poured another glass of tea. We sat and swapped war stories for over an hour. Turns out, he had divorced her 5 years ago after a decade of emotional landmines. He said the HOA power trip was always her thing, that she treated neighborhood rules like commandments etched in stone, and that she once tried to fine a 6-year-old for riding a tricycle on a walkway. You know, he said at one point, she wasn't always like that. She used to be not normal but manageable. Somewhere along the line, the rules became her religion. And if you didn't worship at her altar, you were the enemy. I asked if he knew where she went after the eviction. He shrugged. Probably her sister's place. They're the same person, just different fonts. That night, as I sat on the porch watching the sky darken, I felt something I hadn't in months. Real, actual peace. The kind that comes from knowing you fought back, stood your ground, and won, not with anger or pettiness, but with calm resolve and strategic thinking. Karen had tried to control the narrative, twist the truth, and turn me into a villain. But the facts didn't lie, the footage didn't lie, and more importantly, I never stooped to her level. That mattered. Weeks passed, and life settled into a comfortable rhythm. I almost forgot what chaos felt like. Until one Sunday afternoon, a sleek black SUV rolled slowly down the street and pulled into the driveway across from mine. It was a house that had been empty for months, foreclosed and freshly renovated. A realtor's sign sat at the edge of the lawn, flipped to sold. I watched from my porch as the SUV door opened, and out stepped Karen. Sunglasses, tight ponytail, clipboard. She stood there surveying the yard like a general arriving at a new battlefield. My stomach didn't drop. I didn't panic. I just leaned back in my chair and watched. She didn't see me. Not yet. She was too busy measuring the porch with her eyes, probably already planning where her potted plants and lawn signs would go. But I had no doubt that eventually she'd turn her head, spot me across the street, and have the shock of her life. But I wasn't worried. I picked up my phone and made a call. "Hey, Steve," I said when he answered. "Guess who just bought the house across from mine?" There was a pause, then a groan. "You've got to be kidding." I laughed. "Not even a little. Looks like the sequel's about to start." Steve sighed. "Want me to dig out the complaint forms?" I chuckled and said, "Nah, not yet. Let's see how long it takes her to realize I bought that property too." Because what Karen didn't know was that the house across the street had been listed through the same agent I'd worked with to get the duplex. And after seeing the listing sit for weeks with no bites, I'd put in a quiet offer under a business name. I hadn't planned to move forward unless I saw a reason. And now, thanks to the universe's impeccable sense of humor, I had the best reason of all. This time, I wouldn't be her landlord. I'd be her neighbor. And I was just getting started.